Hi, and welcome to another podcast of Crossing Borders. Today we have Terry King with Guidepost Solutions. Welcome, Terry.
Hi, Stephanie. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Fantastic. So you've been with Guidepost for a while. Can you give a little bit about your background and where you're located now and just a little bit of your history?
Sure. Thank you. I've actually been with Guidepost for a year, although I do have a background with a number of individuals and folks who work within Guidepost for a much longer period of time. I'm coming up on my 25th year in the security industry, which is crazy to say. I began my career on the consulting and engineering side, originally just backing myself into security, having worked and studied architecture and knowing CAD, and eventually working my way through consulting and engineering, and then spent 10 years on the integration side with a number of large systems integrators and partnership in my own firm, and then working with some smaller integration firms and building out their offices and building up their businesses before joining Guidepost last year. I'm currently based in London. I oversee our EMEA and APAC operations, which consist of both our technology and consulting divisions, as well as our MCI, which is monitoring, compliance, and investigation. Guidepost, if you aren't aware, is a global consulting and engineering and risk mitigation firm, and we have offices based all over the globe, including here in London, which oversees EMEA. We have a team in Singapore. We have offices in Colombia, as well as all over the United States. And our customer base is as varied as our office structure. So I mentioned that we have a security technology and consulting division, and that covers the realm of consulting and technology and project management and engineering and design. And we do projects all over the globe. And then we also have that MCI group, which is monitoring, compliance, investigations, and that covers the broad spectrum of any number of customers that we work with globally, including international finance, compliance with regulatory requirements, construction monitoring. So a very diverse offering in the entire risk mitigation realm.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is. That's what makes the work here, actually.
So, you're based in London now, and you're heading up EMEA, which leads into what we want to talk about with crossing borders. And, we want to talk about how it's different doing business in Europe versus the US. So I'll kind of let you maybe just kind of kick it off as to what you see some of the biggest differences are in dealing with all of these projects that you were just talking about.
So, there's a huge difference. We could go on ad nauseum about the topic, but I think it really comes across culturally in that there is a diversity and a level of patience of that diversity in the UK and EMEA marketplace that we probably don't have in the US. And I can speak for both, having worked specifically in the US for a long period of time, but also having worked on projects inside EU, UK, and EMEA for much of my career. So in the US, we tend to be very monolithic and homogenous in nature, and we apply very much the same hierarchical approach to getting projects done. And on the construction side, that can be a pretty heavy-handed, strong-natured approach. And there's fast-track projects. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of emphasis to get things done, and whether it's being done in one part of the country or the other, they are very much done the same way, and the approach is to get them done the same way. In the EMEA marketplace, there is obviously a greater history. There is a greater diversity in areas in the United States that we think of as smaller areas. You may have 4 or 5 different cultures and regions and different regulatory requirements, much less languages to deal with. And so there is a much greater patience for having to work with those cultural challenges. So for instance, you have a number of firms that are what we might call regional or even international firms that have smaller offices based out of the UK that are having to deliver projects or working to deliver projects in 4 or 5 different countries in Europe. And the regulatory requirements may be different there. The ability to get certain products may be different there. There may be certain standards of care relative to where products have to be manufactured, and what their compliance requirements may be. And you may be dealing with workforces that come from 2 or 3 different, not just countries, but complete different cultures. And so understanding that and being able to deliver and communicate requires much greater nuance and less what I call aggro. It's not the American approach of just conquering and pushing down your agenda. It's the ability to get work done and get it done right, and get it done with the understanding that you're going to have to work through any number of challenges.
What are some of those biggest challenges you're dealing with? Is it more hardware? Is it the different cultures? I mean, because there's so many different things you have to take into consideration when you're crossing from one country to another.
Yeah, it can be, it can vary by country to country. So for instance, with one of our global customers, we may be working on a project in the Netherlands, we may be working on one in Germany, we may be working on one in France. And in France, the challenge may be the access to the hardware and standards that we otherwise would apply. So for instance, door hardware, which we may standardize and be able to access in the Netherlands and may be able to get in Germany, we can't gain access to in France because of requirements that say the product or the door hardware or anything that fits into a fire-rated door has to be manufactured in France and has to be a French product. And that's just an example. And it's not right or wrong, it's just that's a different requirement that France has developed in order to maintain certain standards in their in how they build projects. And in Germany, it may be that we do have access to the product there, but the manufacturer of the door doesn't quite understand the specs that may be written around an imperial sizing. And so having to get that hardware up front as the doors are being made and get that installed at the factory as opposed to getting it installed on site are the difference between us having a fire-rated door that's properly sealed and one that is not, and requiring changes at the end. And then working in the Netherlands, for instance, right now, in this COVID era, they've tightened their regulations about accessing the country right now because of the R rating of their COVID numbers. So that means getting people in and out becomes the challenge as opposed to the material. So within a what we might consider in the US, a small area of a region has 3 different situations that are being impacted by 3 totally different regions on the same customer.
Yeah, the world is definitely changing. So with some of those challenges and you're having to figure out different regulations within different countries, do you rely on the vendors to provide that information? Is it something, Guidepost has to figure out? Is it system integrators? How do you handle all of those nuances?
Well, it definitely has to be collaborative in nature. I mean, certainly there's a duty of care for us as the consultant to understand and maintain and know what the regulatory requirements are, particularly as it pertains to our customers with standards who otherwise may choose an approach that doesn't meet the minimum requirements. And but some of these are very nuanced. Some of them require interpretation, and it requires relationships in the countries at large. So we have to, 1, know what's going to hold up. We, 2, have to have an awareness of who we can communicate with and collaborate with to better understand those. But also whether it's direct with the customer when we're doing projects that are just straight to the customer, or whether we're working within a construction tier, it really becomes much more collaborative about ensuring that projects are properly planned and that we understand all of the implications of the regulatory requirements so that we can get everybody lined out. One of the most unique aspects, I think, in working in this atmosphere, there does tend to be a much more greater collaborative push, fewer people wanting to point fingers about identifying a problem, more people wanting to get it right rather than either delaying the project or worrying about who is going to be the one who, got it right or got it wrong. They're just worried about getting the overall project right. So it's a collaboration. I think I don't think it's any one individual.
Interesting. And that leads into a couple of the questions then. So are you working with different vendors in different regions? Do you try to stick with a global vendor? or is it a combination of all of those things?
Yeah, it's a combination of all of them. Early in my career, there was a huge push on projects to try and find a single global entity, or even within the United States, a single entity that could cover all markets. And I think that's virtually impossible. And even though there are a number of large systems global integrators, the footprint, there's just no way to handle that footprint. And I think, having worked on the integration side, you always felt that your weakest link was always the one that stood out the most. And so there is no one homogeneous solution. And in some regions, you may have a regional integrator who has a very strong LSP base, who's able to get what you need done properly and is a very trusted resource. And there may be other markets, just because of the nature of those markets, it is better to have a large systems integrator, somebody who has experience, somebody who has feet on the ground, somebody who has an ability to get work done and has workers who are capable of doing so. So for instance, during this COVID lockdown recently, we were working on a project within the EU, and the borders had closed. And we had a customer with a fast track project who had service level agreement with one of their customers to get work done. And despite the fact that we were in the middle of a global pandemic, the work still had to get done. And we had to turn to a large systems integrator who had feet on the ground. Now, their experience was largely in fire and life safety as opposed to security. But because of their background, because of the communication, because of the standards and specs, we were still able to forward and get the work completed using a large systems integrator as opposed to a smaller regional integrator with LSPs in the marketplace. So, it really is driven by the needs. It's really driven by the capabilities. I think that today there are any number of smaller integrators with strong LSP bases that can do work across a large region. And there are a number of large systems integrators who are improving their capabilities worldwide to deliver a more unified product.
Yeah, it definitely becomes complicated. Do you feel that there's better collaboration within maybe EMEA with crossing borders than maybe in the US? Like you said, sometimes the weakest link stands out so much.
Right.
But do you feel that people are more willing to collaborate and do the right thing and get the job done?
Yeah, I do. There was a term that was coined, I don't know who coined it a long time ago, cooperation. I do think that there is much more cooperation here sometimes. Some of that's derived by the focus. In the US, there's a huge focus, private or public companies, on quarterly earnings and how those can be diluted. And that trickles down to all of the offices where, let's face it, everybody is very P&L focused. And just like on projects here, everybody wants to succeed. Everybody wants to ensure that they're profitable on projects. But there seems to be a greater emphasis on making sure that the project gets done and gets done right and gets done within the context of all of the unique aspects of working in a very diverse region. And so there does tend to be much more cooperation, both between the integration firms, big and small, and between the various parties that are working to get the work executed. And it is a breath of fresh air when you realize that you're not competing against the very people you're collaborating with. And everybody is working in, I don't want to say harmony, because there's never always harmony, and it's not always ideal. It can be very much a challenge, but I just do think that more people are open to the receptive idea of how we can collaborate and get a project done.
That's been my experience too, working in Europe, is more collaborative, more open to working with other cultures and accepting. And even when you go into a country who has special regulations and things, people understand that and they just accept it, and then they look for the best solution for it.
Yeah, it is, there is a certain egalitarian approach to it. I don't think that it's been my experience that a number of individuals can wield their either job titles or roles within projects and push things down in a very hierarchical fashion. Here, there tends to be a much greater understanding that we're working collaboratively, and so titles get dropped a little bit more. Everybody tends to get their hands dirty when there are problems solved, and there's less finger pointing, generally speaking. There can be any number of reasons for that. I've even distilled it down to the fact that the differences in time off policy here in EMEA versus the US. There can be up to a month in which people take off over the course of the year. And for a fast track project, a large construction project, if you've got a project manager with a general contracting firm that's going to be off for almost a month over the course of the year, that person has to trust, has to delegate, has to communicate, and has to collaborate in order to allow that to happen. Otherwise, he's going to be walking around, or she's going to be walking around with their phone all the time. And that just seems to be a different approach. So people tend to work in collaboration, understanding that the team is going to hold the project up as opposed to just one person.
Definitely a different world.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else you'd like to add? Any other information or insights that people would like to hear?
Yeah, I think it can be a challenge, but it can be very rewarding to work on a regular basis with getting projects executed for customers in all these different regions. Right now we're restricted by travel, but especially here in the UK with the project managers who travel quite frequently to Europe, that's one of the benefits that they see is working across multiple cultures and working in multiple places and working with different teams and being able to execute the work. And if you were to look at, say, the project management certifications in say the UK, and I'm using the UK, one, that's where we're largely based out of here, but two, it is a very good jumping off point for the execution of work, particularly for American companies in EMEA. And their certifications around project management circulate around the Prince 2 certification. And then you look at the PMP certification, which is very dominant in the United States from a project management perspective. And neither one of them are wrong. In fact, they both have their qualities, but they're just very unique in the way they approach it. Where Prince 2 provides a very thought-based approach before it really lines out the structure and the organization, the hierarchy of project management. And the PMP is very driven, much like the United States, around metrics and very specific milestones along the way. And they both change the perspective of how your project managers learn and work and mobilize in certain environments. And one of the benefits of living in a country that is, for right, wrong, or indifferent, has been colonial in their past, they've learned to execute projects and work and embed themselves in multiple cultures. And that provides a certain benefit for individuals who, like to one, travel, but work with a diversity of backgrounds and hear different voices. And then they get pride out of their work by having been able to accomplish tasks across this diverse spectrum. So I think there's opportunities here that offer challenges that our project managers in the United States or program managers in the United States otherwise don't get a chance to see. There, it seems as though they're more concerned about imparting a certain methodology across everybody. Here, it is a matter of how do we get our goals achieved through this diversity and through all these challenges that we have.
I definitely agree. Well, thank you, Terry. This has been very insightful, and thanks for participating in Crossing Borders.
Well, thank you for allowing me to speak. It's a great program. I look forward to listening to more podcasts and learning myself. So appreciate all of your time and efforts.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.